Sister Carol F. McConkie, in a recent general conference, said, "In the struggles of mortality, we are never left alone to accomplish our work, to fight our battles, to face adversity or unanswered questions. Jesus Christ taught with a parable that men ought always to pray and not to faint. Listen for the roles that the prayers of faith and of righteous work and action played in helping Clayton and Elizabeth Dunford address the scourge of polio in their families' lives."
Polio, written February 3, 1949, by Elizabeth B. Dunford. It's been a year now, a year of care, a year of watching, waiting, hoping, a year of remembering the moment our doctor told us our 2 boys had polio. And then 2 days later, our eldest son took sick, and the breath in our bodies stopping when we heard the doctor's verdict. 3 of our sons with polio? We had heard and sympathized with other parents when their children had been stricken, but somehow the thought had never occurred that it could happen to us. On a Monday evening in February 1948, Clayton and I decided to sneak away to a church function for a couple of hours. All the youngsters were in bed. Everything was peaceful and quiet. As we walked in the door on our return home, Davy asked for a drink, and when we tried to swallow, it came out of his nose and he had a fit of violent choking. We held his arms high above his head so he could catch his breath. Finally, he settled down, but there was a distinct change in his voice. It reminded us of the time he had had his tonsils out. Knowing that a doctor friend of ours, Dr. Tom Robinson, whom we had seen at the church party, would still be up, we called, and after describing the boy's symptoms, he prescribed penicillin in liquid form to be given immediately. Early the next morning, Dr. Tom came out and gave both boys a thorough examination. We'll never forget that moment, standing in the kitchen when he quietly said, "Well, they have polio." And in just as quiet a tone explained what he knew could be done for them. He described other similar cases that had been successful recoveries, how he had given the treatment of polio much prayerful thought and study, how his paper had been presented and read at the American Medical Convention in Chicago during the year 1945. Since 1940, he had been observing cases, diagnosing treatment, studying, thinking, praying. He went on to explain what could be done for them in the hospital, and also gave us our choice of keeping them home with us, working with them, waking with them, and watching a faster, more effective recovery in less time. We believed his sincerity and in him as a man who was respected and was loved by many in his profession and in his church, and we asked him to go ahead. The boys' liquid was limited. We were told to measure the fluid content in all things, fruits, vegetables, and eggs. All eggnog was measured. Cooked vegetables we guessed at. Bananas beaten into a liquid form and were measured. David grew progressively worse. He became listless and didn't eat. Not having eaten anything for 2 days, the doctor started tubal feedings, and we blessed the day we got our warring blender, for we pureed all vegetables, fruits, and cereals and fed him with a large hypo through the tubes. There was a question whether Dave would build up a tolerance, and for 2 nights we sat by his bedside where we watched him so he wouldn't pull the tube out of his nose, finally having to tie his arms down to the sides of the bed. Douglas complained of pains in his neck, head, and legs. He couldn't sit up without help, and then not for very long. However, all through this period, he was the one who would say something humorous with a twinkle in his eye. For a 6-year-old, he surely helped our morale. My husband, being a food handler, stayed home for 2 weeks. Relatives kindly cared for the other younger children, and we were able to devote our time to our 3 sick boys. Having heard that their bodies should be braced and kept still, We hurriedly asked the doctor if they should be allowed to move around. "Oh, by all means, yes," he said. "Let them roll around as much as they wished." Our eldest boy was so bad he could scarcely walk on his tiptoes, and we were finally forced to carry him, as was the case with David. David's case was diagnosed as bulbar polio. For a week he could neither speak nor take anything by mouth. There were days when we wondered if he would ever speak again. And then we were ashamed for any thoughts of doubt, for the doctor was always so sure of success. Many times we got down on our knees and asked for guidance and wisdom, and were assured that what was being done for our boys was the best, and many times since we have thanked God for his help and divine guidance. The next week showed marked improvement for all three boys, so much so that by propping them up with pillows, without too much discomfort, they were able to enjoy our home movies. We had purchased some comedy reels, and it was a balm to our hearts to hear them laugh loudly in enjoyment of them. In 10 days, we removed the tube from David's nose, and he was a happy and thankful little boy, and we were a happy and thankful family. And then he had his first drink of ice water from an eyedropper. During the time the tube was in his nose, we were constantly wiping out saliva from his mouth and throat, which would choke him if left too long. The love and affection that went out to us during this period was wonderful. The family was organized by an aunt in such a way that we could depend on a certain ones bringing our meals for that day. This alone was a help and a blessing, for we were so busy preparing special meals, washing, cleaning, not to say anything of the time just spent in loving and entertaining our boys. Every day we were more convinced that the treatment they were receiving was right for them. Very soon they were up and about, Carlos being the last one to get around. It was a happy day for us when they could sit up at the table with us. David being able to eat only pureed foods, Douglas acting his own normal self, and Carlos dragging his feet as he took his place. David had to lift his right arm with his left hand in order to be able to get the spoon to his mouth. At visit time, the doctor would run them through their tests. How relaxed were their necks? Could they bend their backs forward? How were their reflexes? Each one would proudly show him the improved condition they were for that day. Douglas was allowed to return to school sooner than Carlos or David. It was exactly 7 weeks from the onset of the disease to the time they returned to their classes. Today, exactly a year ago, we are looking at our three boys. Carlos is getting chesty and putting on weight. We catch him flexing his muscles before the mirror when he thinks we're not looking. And after school, he helps his dad in his shop, which gives him pride in his achievement. David and Carlos play tennis together during the summer, using the very rackets they said they'd never be able to use again. David plays baseball and football and enters into all the activities the school has to offer. We listen carefully for any signs of weakness or change in his voice, but we can't detect any, and we're glad. Douglas, with his roguish grin, is right fat and sassy. He's so proud he can read and rushes home to tell us they have only one more book to read. Some people have warned us of the time when they'll fall, showing up a weakness for lack of medical care. But to them we say, we're perfectly sure. We know what we saw before our very eyes. We know the care they received did not just happen. It was given deliberately with full recognition as to results. Many hours, days, weeks, and months had been directed to the study of polio. Our children weren't guinea pigs. They weren't just 3 more cases to be experimented upon, but were given the kind of attention which comes from serious study, prayerful action, and courage. it was the combined effort of Dr. Tom Robinson and our Heavenly Father that is the reason these boys are well again. Faith and works are not dead. This is the cause these boys can walk again.
This is a note by Clayton Dunford. May I put a comment or two of my own on this page regarding this traumatic event in our lives? It is now years and years later. Mother is gone. To her, you boys owe your lives, for it was she who watched and watched over you tenderly, caring for your every need, bringing food and water in just the right amounts, holding your heads to her bosom, rubbing your backs and necks and legs and arms, reading stories endlessly to you as you were gradually improving to make the hours a little enjoyable. No TV in those days. I say she loved you back to health. My part was one of support to your wonderful mother, and together we had our prayers night and day, asking for divine assistance that you would live to honor him and your Dunford name. Our prayers were gratefully answered. Clayton Dunford, February 1970.